19th century in response to the growing manpower needs of the Navy and city construction. These sentences were granted for a wide variety of offenses, including theft, atheism, drunkenness, homicide, sexual employment, forced intercourse, bribery, document forging, the list goes on. A sentence was never under a year, but usually an average of 8. Apart from the offenses mentioned above, galley sentences could be issued in lieu of other sentences if there is a demand for rowers from the imperial or local fleets, meaning the manpower needed for the Navy could sometimes override a decision of execution or imprisonment, or even take death row prisoners to sea with them. The catch was that most sentences did not specify the time a criminal had to serve. It was left to the ship admiral or captain to release prisoners when and where he chose. So sometimes when a captain was convinced that the convict had reformed himself, but he needed all the hands on deck available, well, you're not going anywhere. You could quite literally be worked to death. It was just as true for the Ottoman as it was for the Habsburg government then, that it used galley sentences to enforce social control, even if the proportion of convicts in the Ottoman Navy never reached the levels of the Spanish fleets. The grim reality of the penal system subordinated to the demands of imperial projects is that what separated life and death for someone was often whether they were physically fit enough to pull an oar. Next up is gonna sting. It's a curvash. This follows galley and corvée labor because it was commonly used on the convicts discussed above. A curvash is a strap-style whip that averages a yard in length. Traditionally, they were made of hippo or rhino leather and was used as a punishment and torture instrument. And the state loved these things. They were widely employed by officials for various purposes of the state, including the obtaining of confessions from criminals, the collection of taxes, and the enforcement of corvée and galley labor. In the interest of maintaining agricultural productivity and increasing state revenue, we saw the use of corvée labor, which was crop and construction version of galley labor. It was a common practice for the foreman to enforce this type of labor by applying a whip on the fellahin, which is the name for those criminals. This whip, made of particularly strong but dry leather, was said to be able to peel the skin off in sheets from its blows. If a trained hand wielded this against you, bones could break and skin could blister and even get friction burns. Part of the comfortable use was that it was codified in the Canon a Fihiliaha, the 1830s set of codes that dealt with crime and punishment. Within 55 articles dealing with offenses related to land cultivation, damages to public property, the offenses by public employees, 26 articles prescribed the use of a curvash as punishment. A curvash was sometimes an instrument used in our next punishment, foot whipping, also called falanga or falaka. One of the best examples I can think of in media is actually the second season of Criminal Minds, when Spencer Reid is taken hostage by a religion-crazed killer who tortures him with this method. Unlike most types of flogging, it is meant to be more painful than cause any actual injury to the victim. The received person is forced to be barefoot so that the soles of the feet are exposed. Ottoman falaka method has the victim also lie on their back with their feet elevated and bound. The underside arc of the feet are then repeatedly whipped. Falaka is usually carried out with a rigid and often heavy stick. It accordingly causes blunt trauma, leaving the person unable to walk and often impeded even for life. The Ottoman version causes more serious injuries than any other because of how the victims are bound. The person undergoing the falaka can twitch and struggle to a certain degree, and as a result, the stroke can land more randomly and can strike more injury-prone areas of the foot. The toes and feet bones will break, as will the shins, and then shin splints were also a side effect, and some people experience knee displacement as well. The immediate experience of pain is described as stinging and searing. The subsequent pain from the succession of strokes is often described as throbbing, piercing, and burning, followed by fainting. Next up is swimming sacks, and not like an oversized ugly bathing suit, although we've all had one of those and it generally does feel like you're swimming in a sack. Anyways, a common execution for women, when they were executed, was being condemned into weighted sacks and dropped into the Bosphorus Sea. A story remains of how Sultan Ibrahim once executed his entire harem this way. Apparently one member had slept with another man, or Ibrahim simply wanted to noob ladies to pick from. Either way, 280 women were rounded up and put into weighted sacks that were tied shut around their necks. The reason we know this story is one of them apparently lived to tell the tale, raising eyebrows in Western Europe when her rescue by a French ship became a public sensation and her story swept newspapers. Haddad crime and punishment is next on our list. Not all of these are found in the Ottoman history, as there's some back and forth between the powers that be in the ways of religion. However, there are accounts of Haddad crimes being punished in Haddad fashions. Early Muslim jurists inherited the concept of a category of crimes called Haddad from references to it made by the Prophet. Their scholars agree that Haddad includes a multitude of crimes, including adultery, consuming intoxicants, false fornication accusations, some theft, armed robbery, or banditry. These are considered violations of the rights of God and human rights. These punishments are specified in the Quran and they're doled out differently each time. For example, example, adultery holds a punishment of 100 lashes, which would be done with a curvash. And if one or both parties were single, they should also have a year of exile. A thief should have their hands cut off as a deterrent for further thievery. And someone who accuses someone else of adultery better have 4 witnesses alongside them. If they can't provide witnesses, they get 80 lashes and will never have their testimony accepted ever again. The Ottoman Empire was known for the removal of thieves' hands and sometimes feet, but also doled out amputation punishment for a few other crimes, such as disloyalty and perjury. And speaking of amputations, the classic rhinotomy is back. When is it not though? Pretty much every historical society was chopping off noses for some reason or another. This is because the mutilation of the extruding facial parts, so nose, ears, and lips, had detrimental effects on sensory, but it was also a permanent alteration of the most expressive parts of the human body. Rhinotomy was practiced by Greeks, Indians, Romans, Byzantines, Chinese peoples, and so on. While it was more prevalent in the Byzantiums than the Ottomans, it didn't change the fact that an unfaithful woman was subjected to it while the man could get away with just a flogging. The Ottomans and Byzantines also have documented history of having the husband of an unfaithful woman be forced to commit the mutilation. You're already heartbroken she cheated, now you gotta cut her face open too. Hard day for those guys. It also established rhinotomy as a punishment for Christian women who had consensual sexual relations with a Muslim man, or a Muslim woman who had consensual sexual relations with a Christian man. Chop chop with the chop chopping, guys, it's time to be flayed alive. All the nausea for this one. Flaying a person alive has been employed as a method of execution in different parts of the world for many centuries, including ancient Rome, medieval England, and the Ottoman Empire. The process of flaying someone starts with stripping the clothes of a victim and tying them suspended by the wrist and ankle. They always started with the scalp and the head, as it inflicted the most suffering and you wanted them to still be alive for that part. Then, making incisions vertically down the body, following the legs, buttocks, and torso, they would peel back and remove the skin as intact as possible. In some instances, parts of the person's body were even boiled to make the skin softer and easier to remove. So that's 2 for 1 torture right there. There were a few ways you could die from flaying, but never from flaying itself. Shock, blood or fluid loss, hypothermia, or infection are some potentials. The time of death could also be anywhere between a few hours and a few days. In the aftermath, many of these corpses would be hung on stakes for their display, their skin either discarded or hung up beside them. And speaking of, our next brutal punishment is impalement. While Vlad Tepes, aka Dracula, is famous for this torture, he actually learned it from the Turkish while held in captivity and tortured for his own homosexuality. With stake impalement, a victim's back door is forced down on the tip of a long, sharp, greased up stake. This starts the impalement process. The stake is then hoisted up and the body weight of the victim on the grease pole would slowly slide them downwards. The pole would travel up the intestinal opening and up through the body very, very slowly. It was a brutal, slow, and agonizing death, and it was one that could take days. Sometimes the Ottomans would flay someone before impalement. Gaunching was another type of brutal impaled death. The victim would be quite literally thrown onto metal spikes, hooks, or rods, and then left to die on them. These hooks and spikes could be found over the edges of certain palace balconies. Gentlemen, tune out and don't say I didn't warn you. The next is the sack squish. According to the 1622 Contemporary Chronicles, the teenage Sultan Osman II suffered an excruciating death by compression of, well, his boys, by an assassin known as Pavlian the oil wrestler. That's right, an oil wrestler crushed his scrot till he died. Wild. Sack crushing is a punishment that was performed as slowly as possible to worsen the intensity of a victim's agony and lengthen its duration. And it was often performed by a vice that would make them burst from the inside and then crunch the spermatic cord with a plier-like attachment. This victim was usually held upside down while this occurred so that they're unable to pass out or enter a state of shock while the torture occurs. This was also because the condemned usually was vomiting repeatedly, so it was just easier to hang him upside down over a bucket. Despite vomiting, the men rarely screamed. This is because the pain would be so physically overwhelming enough that it would affect his ability to even breathe. They would, however, thrash around wildly as each of the boys burst and then the cord was crunched. And don't worry, they would make a full day of torture out of this. Interesting to notice how usually these public spectacles drew crowds due to the lack of entertainment and also their intention to be a public spectacle. Well, unlike flayings or drownings or dismemberments where there's usually jeers and cheering, apparently with a good old sack squish, the crowds remained silent and shocked the whole time. Onlookers, male and female, are recorded to have vomited at the sight. And now, a race for your life. This strange custom began in the 18th century and lasted well into the 19th. This custom only applied applied to viziers of the Sultan who committed a crime or were simply told they were being executed. It happened a lot, and for next to no reason. The official would be summoned to a meeting with the head gardener, and after exchanging greetings, the vizier would be handed a cup of sherbet. If it was white, then the Sultan had granted him life. If it was red, he was to be executed. As soon as he saw red sherbet, the vizier would start sprinting. Well, that's because the color red was the color of blood, and if the vizier wanted to keep it in his body, he could escape his fate by beating the head gardener, who moonlighted as the Ottoman's executioner by the way, in a race through the palace gardens. The head gardener was honor bound to a foot race through the gardens to the place of execution near the Fish Market Gate on the southern side of the palace, a distance of around 300 meters. If the vizier was able to finish the dash before the head gardener / executioner, their sentence would be reduced from death to simple banishment. If the gardener was there, you might as well just keep running right off of a cliff. It isn't clear how this racing tradition got started, although one can speculate it was probably inspired by condemned individuals literally making the mad dash. The last man to save his neck by winning a life or death sprint was Grand Vizier Hakia Sahel Pasha in November of 1822. Hakia.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have the burst of joy. You might be looking at this photo wondering how this extremely joyous photo could hold any dark secrets. Well, this photo won a Pulitzer Prize, and for a very good reason. The photo was captured by Slava Vedder on March 17, 1973 at the Travis Air Force Base in California. The photo shows United States Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Robert L. Sturm and his family. This was taken as he was being reunited with his family after 5 years of being held as a prisoner of war in North Vietnam. On October 27, 1967, he was leading a flight of F-105s when he was shot down over Hanoi and held captive until March 14, 1973. I can't imagine what this must have been like for his family, because there was a chance that he could have not come home at all. The girl with her arms wide open is his daughter, but the looks on all of their faces truly captures the pure joy that they are all feeling. In our number 9 spot today, we have the reflecting pool. This is one of the creepiest or chilling images ever taken. It depicts a young girl in a graveyard who is looking down at her reflection in a pond. Okay, maybe a little eerie, but not exactly chilling. What really makes this photo what it is, however, is that there are seemingly 2 reflections looking back up at the little girl. No one knows who the girl is, where she is, or when this photo was taken, but it is estimated to have come from somewhere around the early 1900s. The photo was analyzed, and it has been said that it is unaltered or edited. Who knows how this photo was possible? Maybe there was some sort of invisible entity standing beside her that we could only see in the reflection, like a reverse vampire or something. In our number 8 spot today, we have the neighborhood nuclear test. This photo shows a mother and her young son looking out the window and witnessing a nuclear test explosion from the comfort of their own home in 1953. Like, what? Imagine seeing that from your window now in 2023. People would be going wild. And of course, any kind of nuclear test should be done as far away from where people live as possible. I know it's not like the test was being done in their front yard or anything, but I still certainly wouldn't be comfortable with them testing a nuclear device anywhere near the place I live. This photo was of course taken before the effects of nuclear radiation from these kinds of explosions were publicly understood. Actually, people have suggested that the public knowledge of these kinds of side effects were suppressed during this time in order to avoid controversy about them testing these kinds of weapons in your neighborhood. Well, that would of course be something insane to witness firsthand. Thankfully, the now widely known health risks associated with this sort of thing has caused this to not be a common occurrence anymore. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Boston Marathon. This photo comes to us from 1967, and it depicts the struggles that Catherine Switzer went through in order to be the first female to finish the Boston Marathon. The photo shows race organizers as well as other participants trying to stop her from running the marathon that she had trained for and was more than capable of completing. She has written a book that explains in great detail all of the things she went through that day and how the critiques and opinions about a woman running the race started even before she had registered to run. People in our history like Catherine are very important, as well as photos like these, because they show when people were literally trying to drag her down, she just kept on running. In our number 6 spot today, we have the reenactment. This photo is extremely unsettling, and for a very good reason. If, when you look at this photo, your instincts tell you that the guy in them is creepy, ding ding ding, you're right. This is a photo that features the German serial killer Joachim Kroll. He is known for taking the lives of 14 people, all varying in age, and he is also known for consuming parts of their flesh. This monster was caught in 1976, and he was discovered when police found out that he had been clogging the plumbing in his apartment with the remains of one of his victims. How gruesome is that? This photo was taken shortly after he was caught and arrested, and what you're seeing is Kroll reenacting one of his crimes for the police. I get goosebumps just thinking about that. I couldn't imagine being there or being the police officer that he's on top of. Talk about terrifying. I'm just glad that they caught him and got him off the street. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Stanley Hotel. This is a photo of the Stanley Hotel, which is the hotel that inspired the famous Stephen King novel, The Shining. This hotel was under construction in the early 1900s and saw a fateful day in 1911. There was an unexplained explosion that happened in room 217. In the explosion, a chambermaid was seriously injured, but she did end up surviving and she actually returned to work. A few years later, she passed away, and ever since her passing, there have been tons of guests who swear that they saw her ghost. Guests have said that they have seen her around the halls of the hotel, but the place that gets the most paranormal activity is, of course, room 217. This is the room where Stephen King and his wife stayed for one terrifying night in 1974. Apparently, they were actually the only guests at the hotel for this night, which at any other hotel might be kinda cool, but I feel like this is not what you want from a haunted hotel. In our number 4 spot today, we have the Rothschild Surrealist Ball. The Rothschild family is one of the wealthiest and most powerful families there has ever been. For years and years, there have been many rumors swirling about just how powerful and influential they really are, and there are some pretty crazy theories out there. In 1972, the family held a Surrealist Ball, which is where this photo comes from. These photos could potentially be very innocent, but there is just something about these very elaborate masks, coupled with the theories about what this family is really up to, that just makes it feel very eerie. I know it's kind of like conspiracy feeling, but I don't know, there's something very haunting about this. This party is one of the most legendary there has ever been, and whether or not they really are involved in shady dealings, that still is pretty impressive. In our number 3 spot today, we have John Lennon. Of course, we all know John Lennon as one part of the Beatles who went on after they disbanded to have a very successful solo career. Lennon was not only a musician, but he was also a peace activist who was strongly anti-war. He was not afraid to display his activism and held a 2-week anti-war demonstration. There was a period of 3 years where the Nixon administration was trying to have him deported for his criticism against the Vietnam War. That's how active he was. On December 8th, 1980, Lennon was leaving the Dakota apartment complex when he was stopped by a man named Mark David Chapman. Lennon signed an autograph for Mark, which is what is happening in this photo, and then Lennon went on his way. Little did he know, Mark was going to shoot him later that night. Once Lennon returned to the apartment complex, Mark was there waiting for him to commit his crime. Mark has said he did it mostly for attention, which is very horrifying, but Mark is also a very religious man who explained that Lennon once saying that the Beatles were more famous than Jesus is what really pushed him to commit this crime. It is very crazy that this photo was captured when Lennon was being so kind to who he thought was a fan, and no one would have ever predicted what would happen just a few hours later. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Hindenburg. This is a photo that was taken during what is now known as the Hindenburg disaster. It is commonly known that blimps, or these kinds of floating airships, use helium in them to float through the air, and it's important to note that helium isn't the choice because it's the only option, but rather because it's one of the safest options, and that is due to the fact that it isn't extremely volatile. Because of a US ban on the exportation of helium at the time, i.e. the Helium Control Act of 1925, although the Hindenburg was designed to use helium, there was a lack of it available, so on the day of the Hindenburg disaster, the much more flammable hydrogen was used instead, and this led to, well, complete disaster. When the Hindenburg floated off on May 6, 1937, it disastrously caught fire during its flight, with 97 people on board. Sadly, due to the fire, there were 35 casualties on board the flight that day. It is an absolutely horrendous situation, which teaches us all a very valuable lesson. And finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have Mount Pinatubo. This is a photo that is showing Mount Pinatubo, which is located in the Philippines, on June 15, 1991. That is the day that this volcano volcano erupted into what would be the second largest volcanic eruption of the 20th century. Certainly impressive, also extremely terrifying. This photo shows the pyroclastic flow full of hot gas and rock being flung into the air. Eruptive activity at the volcano first started on April 2nd of that year, which prompted researchers to set up seismographs in the area. By June, the volcano was having a couple of progressively shallower eruptions before, on June 12th, the volcano had its first spectacular eruption, which sent an ash column 19 kilometers up into the atmosphere. Additionally, smaller explosions continued on June 13th, which then led to some intense seismic activity. After more highly gas-charged magma reached the surface, on June 15th the volcano once again exploded, this time sending the cloud of ash 40 kilometers up into the atmosphere. Volcanic ash and pumice blanketed the surrounding areas, and pyroclastic flows filled what were once deep valleys with fresh volcanic deposits. It was truly magnificent and extremely powerful, and this photo shows just that. I don't know about you guys, man, but like, Mother Nature, I'm afraid of her, alright? Bye. Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the Murdochs. With the high profile of this ongoing case, coupled with the fact that Netflix just released a chilling documentary about the story of this family, it is likely that you may already have quite the idea of who the Murdoch family is. Taylor and I have been watching the documentary series. We're past the first few episodes, and man, is this story wild. A few years ago, if someone asked you who the Murdoch family was, you would have likely described them as one of the most powerful families in South Carolina, with a legal dynasty that has spanned for a century. Now, if I asked you that same question, the answer would be a family who had it all: money, power, status. But some of the members flew a little too close to the sun, tragedy ensued, and now people have lost their lives and the family has been destroyed. It started back in 2015 with the death of Stephen Smith. It carries on to 2018 when Gloria Satterfield, a long-serving employee for the family, was found passed away after a quote trip and fall accident. These events are both horrible and completely atrocious, but despite the rumors, mysteries, and alleged conspirators of these deaths, things really started to unravel for the family in February of 2019 with the death of Mallory Beach. The young woman met her untimely fate after a boating accident where, allegedly, 19-year-old Paul Murdoch was at the wheel, intoxicated. We could spend hours and hours talking about this family and all of these cases and the conspiracies, but we're short for time, which brings me right to the most recent tragedy: the 2021 killings of that same Murdoch who was driving the boat, as well as the killing of his mother, Margaret. Now, I do believe that people are innocent until proven guilty, but it is important to note that the one on trial for these killings right now is the father and husband to the deceased, Alex Murdoch, the patriarch of the family who is supposed to be carrying on that Murdoch legacy. The stories surrounding this family are horrific, tragic, and a reminder of the dangers that money and power can bring. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Sacklers. This family is the one behind the dynasty of Purdue Pharma, who is best known for producing an exceptionally strong prescription painkiller. Of course, we all know just how big and rich a pharmaceutical company could get, especially one that has been around for quite some time. The company was first created in 1952 by 3 Brooklyn-born brothers, and in the beginning, the company mostly dealt in things like laxatives and earwax removal methods. Soon, things for the company took quite an upwards turn, and before anyone knew it, the family was regarded as one of the most esteemed New York families, but they were also known for their philanthropic tendencies, with their names on museums and hospitals, some of the most famous in the world. You see, the thing is, when they released this painkiller in 1995, it led to them amassing an insane $13 billion fortune. That is obviously incredible, but the trouble came when it was realized that this painkiller wasn't nearly as potent as it was marketed to be, and frequent users would be building up a tolerance to it, meaning they needed to use higher and higher dosages. Viewer, welcome to the opioid crisis. Basically, this all spiraled out of control and led to many lawsuits coming against Purdue Pharma. Not only by individuals, but by January 2019, 36 states were suing the company for what the painkiller had done to their citizens. After 2 years of deliberations, the Sacklers finally reached a deal with plaintiffs in bankruptcy court in September of 2021. As part of their Chapter 11 proposal, they agreed to pay $4.5 billion and give up all ownership of the company in exchange for complete immunity in all future opioid liability. Despite this fall from grace, the Sacklers were able to move an alleged $1.36 billion into offshore accounts, so despite their bankruptcy filing and the large sum of money handed over, they will continue to retain quite a large amount of their personal wealth. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Bakers. Jim and Tammy Faye Baker were once the most famous televangelists in America, and they certainly were living in quite a lap of luxury. They had beautiful homes, expensive cars, and a ton of money, but that quickly came crashing down amid horrendous scandal. In the late 1980s, after much success, Jim Baker resigned from the PTL ministry after there was a cover-up to hide some hush money that had been given to church secretary Jessica Hahn over an alleged SA situation. Of course, not necessarily a surprise, but definitely not a good look for a televangelist. This led to more interest in people looking into the family more, and soon it was uncovered that there was some sort of accounting fraud going on as well. The consequences for this came by way of felony charges, conviction, imprisonment, and divorce. That was the end of that legacy, but since serving his time, Jim Baker hasn't exactly slowed down. He not only remarried and returned to televangelism, but he also currently hosts The Jim Baker Show, which focuses on the end times and the second coming of Christ while promoting emergency survival products. So that's interesting. In our number 7 spot today, we have Prince Sado. Born in 1735, Prince Sado was the heir to the Korean throne, but unfortunately, he would go on to suffer from extreme mental illness and delusions. Thankfully for historians and those of us interested in history, the wife of the prince created memoirs, and in them she detailed the horrifying things that happened next. The prince began to kill. He began to hurt and torment people. He basically turned their home into a house of horrors. The prince also endured some pretty horrific treatment from his own father, which of course is not an excuse for the things he did, but it definitely did not help the scenario. Eventually, the family had enough and realized that his behavior would go on to ruin the name of their family forever, so something needed to be done. At the time, tradition stated that if the prince were to be executed, his wife and child would also need to be, but everyone thought that maybe that was a bit too far. Why should they have to pay for his crimes? This led to the king coming up with quite the bizarre workaround for this. On a hot day in July, the king forced the prince to step into a rice chest, which was then locked behind him. This acted as a way to make it seem like he had caused his own death, which is said to have occurred just a few days later. In our number 6 spot today, we have Don Carlos. This little troublemaker never made it to the title of king, but he sure was a little too close for comfort when you hear about the kinds of things he was doing. Carlos was the Prince of Asturias in the mid-1500s, as he was the eldest son of King Philip II of Spain. It is said that Carlos may have had some troubles right from birth, which many believe could be due to inbreeding that was common in the family at the time. Descriptions of his behaviors, though, are far worse than what anyone could have expected. It is said that Carlos did horrible things like hurting or taking the lives of animals for fun. Nowadays, we call that a huge warning sign for potential killers. Back then, it was like, I don't know. Was anybody even watching you, really? It is even said that at one point he purposefully blinded all of the horses in the royal stable. Soon, of course, his cruelties would extend to humans, with people claiming that one time he chose to harm a servant girl for no reason other than because he could. Major King Joffrey vibes in that one. And apparently one time he made a shoemaker eat a pair of shoes that he had made that the prince didn't like. He was just a little twerp. Carlos was set up by his family to marry the eldest daughter of King Henry II, but after a few hours with the man, she decided that there was absolutely no way in hell. Like, he was so bad that she would rather marry his dad. Which she did in 1560. In the end, Carlos was found to be plotting to take out his own father, which landed him in prison in solitary confinement, where he passed away 6 months later. In our number 5 spot today, we have Prince John. It is said that this may be one of the darkest secrets of the British royal family. Prince John would have been the uncle of Queen Elizabeth II, but he passed before she was born. Prince John was the 6th child of King George V and Queen Mary, and it is said that he suffered from seizures, likely as a result of epilepsy, although it's hard to diagnose for certain because of all of the secrecies surrounding him and his illness. From the age of 4, when he had his first seizure, until his untimely and very early death, Prince John lived in a separate estate where he was cared for by a governess. Many people have since criticized the royal family, calling their treatment of Prince John as callous or inhumane, like they were hiding him away for being ill. Of course, the palace was concerned with the monarchy's public image, and there was a belief at the time that royals shouldn't have any physical or mental ailments, although That is of course impossible. They also didn't include him in public events, which could have been another image thing, and also perhaps because of a worry that he might have a seizure at one of these events. At the end of the day, it was definitely a different time, but the idea of excluding him because he was ill truly is a really sad thought. In our number 4 spot today, we have Marguerite and Blanche of Burgundy. This is a royal scandal that took place all the way back in 1314, and it starts off with the daughters-in-law of King Philip IV of France. I think that's the 4th, here's hoping. These young women, Marguerite and Blanche of Burgundy, were accused of having quite a scandalous affair with 2 brothers, Philippe and Gautier. So this already is some hot tea, but apparently when Queen Isabella of England, who is the daughter of King Philip of France, so I guess like sisters-in-law with these ladies, when she heard these stories, apparently she's the one who totally outed their affairs. It was obviously a huge deal and both of the women admitted to their adultery. This led to them being pretty much erased from public knowledge. They had their hair cut short and they were thrown in a dungeon, and even though Marguerite was meant to be the Queen of France through her marriage, when her husband ascended the throne, she stayed locked in the dungeon until the marriage could be annulled. Little is known about what happened to either of them after this point. However, it is believed that Marguerite passed away in 1315 and Blanche 1326. As for the men in this affair, well, they met quite a gruesome fate that involved the removal of their bits and pieces before their swift execution. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Duggars. Alright, one of the most famous reality TV families, and even before the horrors of this family came to light, they were already a family that had fame due to quite a strange reason. If you're unfamiliar with who the Duggars are, you might be more familiar with the show that they used to have on TLC titled 19 Kids and Counting. Yeah, the show ran on TLC for 7 years until it was cancelled in 2015, and the show featured, well, the Duggar family. The family consisted of parents Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar and their 19 children, 9 daughters and 10 sons, all of whose names begin with the letter J. It was an interesting time, and they seemed like this huge, happy, religious family, but in the years since the cancellation of the show, some horrifying things came to light. Initially, the reason that TLC suspended and then subsequently cancelled the show is because it came to light that the eldest son in the family, Josh, had done some horrible things and acted violently, horrendously, and inexcusably against a number of girls, even some in his own family. Due to the popularity of the show before these serious stories came to light, there was a spin-off show that was created titled Counting On. This show first aired in December 2015 and stayed on the air for a surprising number of years before it was pulled, and the family yet again found themselves in the center of a scandal that had to do with Josh. This time he was caught in possession of a certain kind of tape that no one should have, and that should not even exist at all. I can't say which kind of tape, but just know it's the worst of the worst. These are, of course, some of the worst scandals that have surrounded the family, but truly, it's only a drop in the bucket of the many stories surrounding them. In our number 2 spot today, we have King Juan Carlos. The former King Juan Carlos of Spain, when he first ascended the throne in 1975, was highly looked upon. He was said to be bringing a new age for the country, an age of democracy. His reign lasted for quite a while, but by the time 2014 rolled around, he was forced to abdicate the throne. This was due to a few reasons. Firstly, his public ratings started to plummet after word spread of him being a bit of a womanizer and after an explosive affair, but also because of a lavish elephant hunting trip he took in the middle of an economic collapse. Okay, fair enough, I can see why people were getting their guard up a bit. So the king abdicated the throne in favor of his son Philippe, who sits on it to this day. During this time, however, the scandals in the family weren't only to do with Juan Carlos. In January of 2014, another of his children, his daughter Infanta Cristina, was charged with tax fraud. She has since been acquitted. That happened in 2017, but she was stripped of her title as the Duchess of Palma de Mallorca, and this whole deal had her leaving Spain and moving to Switzerland. The drama doesn't end here, however, because her husband actually was convicted in the case with charges that included embezzlement, fraud, and tax evasion, and he received prison time in 2018. In the end, none of the fraud charges have ever been linked back to the former king, but this entire debacle did cause the former ruler to move out of Spain. With his move came a letter, part of which read, quote, "Guided by the conviction to perform the best service to the Spanish people, their institutions, and you as king, I am communicating my thoughtful decision to move at this time outside of Spain. A decision I make with sadness, but with great serenity. I have been king of Spain for almost 40 years, and during all of them I have always wanted the best for Spain and for the crown." In our number 1 spot today, we have the Rothschilds. This family is easily one of the most, if not the most powerful family in the modern era. In fact, it is said that most of us in the Western world don't even realize the impact this family has had on our lives, as our consumer-driven lifestyle is definitely directly related to the monetary systems this family put in place. This would include the United States Federal Reserve. Because of this insane amount of money and power that this family has held for over a century, there are plenty of conspiracy theories going on surrounding them. The conspiracies run deep, and they go quite dark. They touch on everything from assassination attempts, some successfully completed on sitting presidents, to heinous World War II agendas that would have benefited the family. Of course, they are conspiracies, so no one is quite sure which of these secrets, if any, are true. Even still, the stories and speculations swirl today, waiting for some piece of evidence to maybe bring them to light.
Here you just get knowledge and love. Subscribe also, that'd be great. Here are the top 10 unsettling historical facts not for the faint-hearted. Let's do this. Number 10, ancient Mayan turkey worship. A lot of words there. Turkeys play a significant role in ancient Mayan culture, both as a source of food and feathers for clothing and decoration. If you were a turkey, you were screwed, really, in any department. Turkeys were domesticated by indigenous peoples in Mexico and Central America over 2,000 years ago, and their use and importance grew over time. It varies, and sometimes it looks like we're going to worship a turkey and we have to talk about it. The Mayans also believed in animal symbolism and incorporated it into their religious beliefs. That's why we can sometimes say that they worshipped turkeys. Now, there's no record of turkeys being worshipped as deities, but that's a hot rumor. It's really a fib, but you'll hear that time to time. Turkeys are turkeys, they're not deities, they're just, I don't know, they're yummy, they're delicious, depending on if you like to eat them. Turkeys, yeah. They're deities, the more you know. Number 9, horse priest. Caligula, let's talk about this fella. He was a Roman emperor who ruled from 37 to 41 CE. Now, he was known for his erratic behavior, of course, given what I'm about to say, including his decision to make his horse a priest. His horse a priest. I don't know how that's possible. According to historical accounts, Caligula had a deep attachment to this horse and often lavished it with attention and gifts and lots of pets, I bet. He even went so far as to build a marble stand for Enceladus, his horse, and reportedly discussed making him a consul. First of all, a marble stand? Who's gonna... That's insane. Secondly, the decision to make the horse a priest was likely a political move just to mock the Roman Senate, which Caligula was known to despise at the time. So, I don't know, the act was seen as a demonstration of Caligula's power and disregard for traditional Roman customs and or values. Yeah, I would say so. Guy brings a horse in. Imagine being a taxpayer and you see this. Oh, I'd be livid. Number 8, Abraham Lincoln the wrestler. Abraham Lincoln was a vampire hunter in that one movie, but in real life, he was also a wrestler. Yeah, he was kind of a badass. Who knew? Abe Lincoln was a famous American statesman and politician who of course served as the 16th president of the United States from 1861 until he was killed in 1865. Now, as a young man, before he changed history, of course. As a young man, Lincoln was known for his impressive physical strength and was said to have been an accomplished wrestler. Yeah, if he had seen that attack coming, he probably would have knocked them right out. I don't know. Dude's choking out politicians. Like what? According to some accounts, he participated in several wrestling matches in his youth, including one in which he was defeated by a man named Jack Armstrong. Yeah, imagine tapping out Abe Lincoln. How dare you, Jack? What are you doing? Lincoln was also a big fan of wrestling and often attended matches just to watch, even though he wasn't, getting in tights and brawling with people. In fact, it's said that once he walked 20 miles just to watch a wrestling match where his favorite wrestler, Cornelius the Cornishman Grogan, was competing. So yeah, he was committed to the bits, He was committed to the craft, I guess. His involvement in the sport helped to cement its popularity in the United States. Of course, being a president who wrestled, that's, fair, that ought to do it. Don't mess with Abe, I guess, or else he'll choke you out or something. Number 7, yellow attire. Back in 1420, the Venetian government issued a law requiring ladies of the night to wear yellow attire as a way to easily identify and also regulate their profession. Yeah, anyone looks like a big bright banana. There you go. They're gonna, your banana. The law was intended to control the spread of sexually transmitted disease and prevent the moral decay of Venice. So that was their solution. Hey, we're gonna wear yellow tops now. That'll solve everything. Nice. These ladies were required to wear a yellow veil and a yellow tunic, but they were also prohibited from wearing any expensive clothing or jewelry. Yeah, no personality, no fun at all, just business. The color yellow was chosen because, well, it was associated with betrayal, envy, and illness. All things sex, I guess. The law remained in effect until the end of the 16th century. My dad has a really bright yellow shirt. I have a new nickname for him now. Can't wait to call him after I'm done filming this one. Called Banana Bill. It's a good one. Number 6, no tennis. Yeah, you want to play doubles? Think again, pal. How dare you? The 1495 tennis law, it was real. It was a French law that prohibited the playing of tennis in public spaces. So if you're gonna do it quietly and privately in your own home, all right? How dare you? Don't even think about playing tennis. Even after this video, don't do it. The law was enacted by King Charles VIII to address concerns about the game being too violent. Yeah, it was supposedly being used to train for combat and the potential for public disorder. Tennis. Yeah, who knew? The law also imposed penalties for those caught violating it, including confiscation of property and imprisonment. Yeah, what are you in for? I was playing doubles with my mother-in-law, so now I'm in prison, I guess. Huh. Yeah, you killed 9 people. Nice. Can't wait to bunk with you. Despite its intended purpose, the law did not prevent the game from being played, obviously. Can't stop us, pal. It slowly evolved into our modern day tennis, which we love. I love it. It's awesome. Tennis is very intense, also. I don't disagree with any of these laws put in place. My father and I got in a bout one time over the lines. Gotta watch those lines. You need a line guy if you're playing tennis. You need it. Number 5, not reporting a dead body. Yeah, this was a big deal. I mean, still is, but hear me out. This one reminds me of Stand By Me. What a classic. You can find dead whales, dead bodies. It's the Dark Ages. You gotta find a lot of things, but you gotta report them, all right? It's the law. You gotta report dead whales and you gotta report dead people. Both very important. In medieval times, roughly around 1240, the law surrounding the discovery of a dead body, well, it varied depending on the region and the time period, of course. But generally, if somebody discovered a dead body, they were required to report it to the courts, or the lords rather, my lady. So quiet. That's all medieval times right there. Failure to do so could result in punishment, as it was considered suspicious behavior, which, you know, fair. We'll ask some questions regardless, no matter what. More often than not, the finder would be asked to provide information about the circumstances surrounding this death, including any possible suspects. Yeah, take a guess, detective, no pressure. In some cases, the finder may have been entitled to a reward for discovering the body, and in other cases, well, you yourself could be charged with the death of said body. So, I don't know, 50-50. Let's do one of these. Oh, I didn't see anything. See ya. Number 4, no stealing dead whales. I mentioned it. You want to know more? Sure, let's do it. I'm not sure how one would do this, first of all, without the help of 490 of their closest friends, because whales are pretty heavy. But the no stealing dead whales law originated in the 17th century in England, where beached whales at the time, they were considered a valuable commodity due to their oil, their meat, their bones, whatever. The law made it illegal at this point to take a beached or stranded whale without permission from authorities or lords, and violation of the law could result in fines or imprisonment. Again, imagine going to jail for a whale. Your bunkie has 19 kills. You're like, yeah, I took a whale, so have at her. I can't get a kayak into water without pulling something. You're telling me medieval mobs, hungry mobs, drag whales back home? That's impressive, really, if anything. Guys must have been jacked. Nice leg workout. All beached whales in the UK have belonged to the king or the queen since 1324. One guy back in the early 2000s, he actually offered a dead whale to Her Majesty, but she politely declined. But he was doing it right, you know what I mean? He read some medieval books. He was like, good evening. All right, bring it in. Number 3, Abel and Baker. Okay, we often remember Laika, the space dog, and her 103-minute cosmic journey around Sputnik 2. Very short and sweet trip there. But does anybody remember Abel and Baker? These two, are you kidding me? This was America's version of Laika. This was less than 2 years later. On May 28th, 1959, the United States launched 2 female primates, Abel and Baker, into space. Yeah, we launched monkeys into space. Then we made them snowboard and make movies about skateboarding. But first, we launched them into space, which was crazy. This mission lasted 15 minutes and they both safely returned back home with trauma. Lots of monkey trauma. The monkeys weren't injured from the cosmic commute, but a radio message came in shortly after they splashed down in the Atlantic. And the message said no injuries or other difficulties. It said Abel, Baker, perfect. Yeah, perfect. I mean, probably not, but they were alive, so perfect enough. I don't think we can blast any more primates into space going 10,000 miles an hour. That's just my guess, but you know, this was 1959. Things have changed a bit. Abel sadly passed away shortly after the flight. Meanwhile, Baker got all that fame. She got really famous. She was getting 150 letters a day, like fan mail letters. How is space? What's it like? Were you in movies? Can you skateboard as well like that guy on TV? Imagine if she had Twitter back then. Oh man, these ladies are icons. Never mind Leica. Hit that thumbs up for Abel and subscribe for Baker. Here we go. They're watching right now. They're watching you do it, so you better do it. Number 2, the boot. We'll finish with some medieval punishments because, you know, I'm watching Game of Thrones again right now, so why not? Let's do this. The boot was interesting. This was a scary punishment that you won't believe actually happened. We didn't learn about this one back in school. The device at hand here was a massive oversized boot, large enough to fit both of your feet, and it was also made of iron or copper. You see where I'm going here. Well, these boots were often brazed onto the floor, so the accused couldn't move around anywhere, and most of the time they were sitting upright. Now the boots at this point were filled with boiling water, or worse, molten lead. And from that point on, well, it's not gonna be great for you, is it? Another medieval punishment involving boots, which is somehow worse in my opinion, was first seen in Ireland. They were lightweight metal boots that were filled with water, individual, then they heated your feet over a fire until the water inside started to boil out the top of the boot. So I don't know which one's worse, honestly. I'd rather the first one because then it would be faster, know what I mean? I'm not watching something boil. A watched boot never boils, I guess. Number 1, rats. Yeah, save the rats for last. Sure. This one really sums up how terrible humans have been in the past. Rat punishment originated in ancient Rome, classic, but it's been seen many times since, including in Game of Thrones, yeah. What was once called a rat trap involved the accused being tied down to something, and then a metal enclosure would be strapped down onto their abdomen or their chest. Now, inside this metal enclosure, there are of course rats. One or numerous, I don't know, both suck, which the strapped down person can feel walking around with their little rat feet. And at this point, the person instilling the punishment begins heating the other end of the metal enclosure. Now, historically, hot coals were placed on top, which of course very quickly creates a hot environment for these little scurrying plague rats inside on your chest. I'm getting so hot saying this. From here, the rats begin frantically searching for a way out because, you know, just like us, they have survival instincts. But unlike us, they have really sharp teeth. The sharpest teeth ever. The metal enclosure is too hard to bite into, but a human's chest, that is not. That is fine. You see where this is going now. The rats would eat their way out of the danger and into you, which would cause you a lot of pain. I'm gonna go throw up now.
Is MK Ultra. I feel like this is the most acknowledged on our list, but there are still plenty who don't know about MK Ultra, what it is, let alone the fact that it was real. There truly was a period of time in CIA history when they performed covert mind control experiments on civilians and soldiers alike. In the case of MK, it was during the Cold War, and the purpose was researching the ways that they could turn your everyday Joe into a CIA-controlled super agent like some unrealistic Captain America dude. Unsuspecting Americans and Canadians were subjected to CIA research and secretly and unconsensually to psychedelics such as LSD and barbiturates. Additional and illegal methods of hypnosis and possibly chemical, biological, and radiological agents were also equipped on these unknowing participants. Universities participated as a delivery system, but without their knowledge. The US Department of Veterans Affairs estimated that 7,000 soldiers were also involved in the research without their consent. The project lasted some 20 years and cost about $22 million to run. While there's only one known death in relation to the project, we actually don't have the full story on MK Ultra at all. In fact, in 1973, the CIA literally destroyed records of MK Ultra when suspicions and conspiracies of its existence arose, and they spent decades gaslighting the public on this topic before unsealed documents released a few years ago 100% guaranteed its existence. Next is the Stanford prison experiment, in at number 9. We talked about this a little in our top 10 unsettling vintage photos that will leave you confused video, as photos of this experiment still circulate online and are widely discussed. You may have heard of this social psychology experiment that went awry in 1971, funding by US Office of Naval Research and headed by the university professor Philip Zimbardo. The concept was that the situation and circumstances dictate how a person acts, not their personality. It genuinely was a well-meaning idea, at least on Philip's end. He had 24 of his students assigned roles as prison guards or inmates, and some were kept aside as alternatives. It was supposed to last 2 weeks and pay $15 per day. Unfortunately, from the second the 24 were left behind closed doors to exercise the experiment, well-meaning turned disastrous, and Philip got his conclusion very quickly. Day 2, the faux prisoners had a revolt, but over the next few days they underwent awful treatment by those assigned guard roles. Some were traumatized enough to be pulled out prematurely. And on day 6, an outsider observer witnessed the upsetting events taking place and sounded the alarm, and the experiment had to be ended. Some psychologists doubt the core findings of the experiment and claim that the cruelty didn't emerge organically and was instead influenced by Zimbardo nudging the experiment in that direction. Zimbardo, however, has defended his results and stated that these criticisms are misrepresenting his study and the experiences of the people who were in it. Number 8 is Franz Rothschild's aviator suit. Arguably, he could also be dubbed the world's most confident man because he had nothing but that for his own invention, which he crafted in the early 1990s. See, Franz created a parachute using 230 square feet of fabric that would fold up into a wearable suit. Naturally, like all inventions, it needed test trials, so Franz conducted several parachute tests using test dummies, but they all failed. He always denied the invention was the one with the flaws. It was always the building being too tall, the wind vanished at the right time, the dummy was taller than last time, anything he could pin the blame on that wasn't himself. Well, in 1912 he wanted to fling another dummy off a roof, and this time he chose the Eiffel Tower. The inventor was delighted by the crowd that had gathered to see the spectacle, and they were less than delighted by what they saw that day. See, confident Franz wanted to wow the world. What happened if the first time this device worked was right now on the Eiffel Tower in front of his adoring crowd? Well, he couldn't take any chances. Franz strapped himself into the parachute suit and took the leap. Like always, the parachute didn't open, and so Franz became the victim of his own invention. But an autopsy did reveal that he died of a heart attack well before he made it to the ground. Guess he was the last dummy he threw off of a building. The Swedish cavity scandal is number 7. Called the Bipeholm experiments, they were a series of human experiments that took place between 1945 and 55. Now, similar to MK Ultra, the subjects were unaware of their part in the experiment. Unlike MK Ultra, it's arguably way less harmful, but that doesn't make it better. The experiments were done on patients of Bipeholm Psychiatric Hospital in Lund, Sweden, who were fed large amounts of sweets to provoke dental cavities over a 10-year duration. Sponsored by both Sweden's sugar industry and their dental associations, the effort was to determine if carbohydrates affected the formulation of cavities. It was an experiment that provided extensive knowledge on dental health and disease development. In fact, it did its goal, resulting in enough empirical data to link the intake of sugar to dental caries and cavities. However, the Swedish government recognizes the violation of medical ethics principles and formally and publicly apologized for its actions. Cloudbusters is number 6, and nothing can prepare you for how weird this is. So, the psychoanalyst Wilhelm Reich somehow managed to connect the dots between intercourse, weather, and an alien invasion. Of course, he was influenced by Sigmund Freud, and Reich extended Freud's work on human libido into the proposition of an unheard of energy called orgone. Orgone apparently was responsible for everything, from the weather to why the sky is blue. To give you an idea of how scientifically sound Reich's concept was, orgone has been compared to the Force in Star Wars. Apparently, he believed a discharge of orgone energy happened when climax was achieved via intercourse, and through the manipulation of this energy, you could treat neuroses and even cancer. So in the 1950s, Reich ups the levels and becomes convinced aliens are spraying the Earth with radiation to prevent us from using the powerful orgone energy. So he and his son build cloudbusters, a row of tubes attached to hoses that were immersed in water aimed up at the sky. Apparently, the water would absorb the radiation. Well, the FDA said, what the hell is that? And they ordered this machine destroyed, as well as any other apparatus he made. When he tried to smuggle them out of the state, the FDA saw him arrested. Number 5 sounds relaxing. It's a year in bed, except it wasn't relaxing at all. Cosmonaut, which is fancy talk for astronaut in Russia, Boris Morukov wanted to examine the effects of weightlessness on the human body. So in exchange for a car, if you succeeded in the experiment, in 1986 Boris found 11 suitable volunteers, which he made lie in bed for 370 days without ever getting up. Every subject was to remain in a sleeping position, aka fetal position, and perform everyday activities that way. This was eating, watching TV, working, or washing. They had to stay as they were. He chose this particular position as it was the closest to the sensation of weightlessness that is felt in space. The point is to simulate the effects of microgravity on the human body, and those effects are terrible in the long run. Loss of muscle and bone, loss of function of internal organs, including the heart slowing as it doesn't have to push blood up against the force of gravity, and having trouble digesting. After about 4 months, muscle clenching exercises or walking on a vertical treadmill placed at the foot of the bed was allowed. The idea was to see if the well-known deterioration of the body could be countered by these exercises. It couldn't. No ill will went towards Boris though. He interacted regularly with the people involved, and some even gave him little gifts made out of their provided craft supplies. Even after the experiment, when participants had to spend 2 months regaining their ability to walk, no bitterness was held. But at least everybody got a car! Operation Midnight Climax is number 4, and it sounds like the name of a DVD that'd be behind the XXX curtain at an old Blockbuster. In reality, it was a 1950 CIA mind control research scheme. Lesser known than MK Ultra, it was actually more tactical in its execution. So the CIA paid ladies of the night to lure everyday, non-consenting San Fran and New York citizens into safe houses disguised as cheap motels. They were slipped substances such as L and P without their knowledge, and then monitored by the CIA through one-way glass. Oh yeah, this is some real dystopian movie energy here. Since this project wasn't to make super soldiers like MK, its purpose was purely educational for the government, investigating how substance affected different people and intervening if they felt something could go astray. Because of their subtly and well-plotted scheme, they operated for a full decade using red light districts, and Operation Midnight Climax actually provided the government with extensive knowledge on psychedelics, surveillance technology, and tactics, and even blackmail. Fortunately for those unwitting test subjects, Operation Midnight Climax was shut down in 1965. Number 3, we learn about the Dr. Fox effect. This tricky little experiment educates us on social cues and expectations, and how we shouldn't always be fooled by them. This was done to test if content that's well presented and polished, no matter how incorrect, can fool experts because of who or how it's presented by. This original experiment was performed at the University of Southern California School of Medicine in 1970 during an annual conference. The topic, mathematical game theory as applied to physician education, was chosen to eliminate any chances of the students being lectured would know something about the actual subject. The students were then split into 2 groups, one with real mathematician Dr. Myron Fox, and the others with actor imposter of him, who was ironically named Mr. Michael Fox. In the first half of the study, Mr. Fox taught his material in a monotone voice. This lecture was then compared to the monotone lecture of Dr. Fox. The students who attended the lecture taught by Dr. Fox had learned material and performed better on an examination. Those led by Mr. Fox were confused and lost. However, when both the actor and the mathologist had presented their material in an engaging, expressive, and enthusiastic manner, the students rated Dr. Fox as equal to the real professor, even though he had absolutely no idea what game theory was. This lack of correlation between content coverage and ratings resulted from conditions of strong expressiveness became known as the Dr. Fox effect. Number 2 is yellow fever experiment, and it's just illogical and gross, so I can understand not being taught this one, especially because it's pointless in the end. Stubbins Firth was a 19th century medical student who absolutely was sold on yellow fever not being a contagious disease.
Kicking off our list at number 10, the London tornado. We've all heard about the Great Fire of London in 1666, so let's talk about another horrible event from history, shall we? That's why I'm here, after all. On October 16th, 1091, harsh winds from the southwest took out more than 600 houses and a handful of churches. There was a mighty tornado. The Church of St. Mary was a rather unholy place to be on that specific day. The tornado killed 2 men in this building, and it tore up the roof, and timbers went everywhere. The rafters were actually ripped from the structure, then slammed down far away back into the earth. Turns out historically about half of these rafters were buried in the dirt. That's how much force was thrashing them about. Tornadoes are so scary. I feel a strong wind outside and I'm immediately back inside. That's it. I'm shaking in my boots. I don't mess with wind. Number 9, the Great Drowning of Men. Such a tragic name, my lord. How about we take out the word great and all these references, maybe? I don't know. It's kind of horrible. In the Middle Ages, coastal areas around the North Sea were hotspots for flooding. Now, historically, there were numerous reports of flooding here, and for some reason, between the 11th and 15th centuries, this area would get absolutely destroyed. It would get completely swamped. And it's even larger than you can possibly imagine. The St. Marcellus flood took place on January 16th, 1362. Now, the death toll here, I mean, obviously it's impossible to tell for sure, but historians believe it was at least 25,000 people. That's horrible. Atlantic gales were to blame for the rush of water, because this event also goes hand in hand with the Great Wind of 1362. The Great Wind. Awesome. The Mighty Wind. Like, it's not great at all. It's not really good. Number 8, one name. This next one here blows my mind. I never really thought about this before, but what was it like before we had surnames? Surnames were introduced to us in England in 1066, but before then, well, you were just Greg, period. That's it. There was another Greg, well, that was it. Now you guys had to fight till the death. No, I'm just kidding. At first, surnames were a little bit different. They were descriptions almost about the person you were meeting. So you'd meet a guy and he would say, hey, I'm Greg Red, Red signified his red hair. Makes sense. Greg red, Greg gray, he's getting a little old. Got it, Gregs, we're good. But the best part, your name could actually change over time because your description and then your appearance would also change. So one day you would meet Greg Red, but eventually his hair would fall out, he would age, then get stressed because, you know, he's living in the medieval times and all. And then once that happens, your name would change to match your new description. Now you're Greg Ball. Ball back then meant bald in Middle English, so everyone had the last name Ball. Isn't that amazing? Next video, I'll be Taylor Ball. I'll just be bald. Why not? Just change it up like Heisenberg. Number 7, medieval meals. Yes, I hope you're eating while you're watching this. If so, give it a thumbs up, take a big bite, and good luck. Seeing as the holidays just passed, I figured there's no better time to mention a medieval holiday tradition. I'm glad we don't do this one anymore. This one's pretty gross. Swans today, they're beautiful. We see them traveling in pairs, and we don't hunt them down because, well, that would be insane, right? Medieval days, swans were hot property. They were a delicacy of the upper classes. Christmas swan pie. Nice, here you go, for you and yours. Enjoy, Merry Christmas. I would be crying on Christmas Day if I saw this on the table. They would actually stuff swans with beef, which I personally don't recommend. Turkeys, I'm like, okay, that we've dealt with. Swans, I'm like, no, but they're in love. They mate for life. Do we eat both? Let's eat both, I guess. Other medieval meals included peacocks, cranes, turtle doves, sparrows, and herons. Herons? Imagine Christmas dinner is a heron lying on the table. You're like, really, Dad? I don't really want to eat this. This is the long neck. Number 6, the dancing plague. Okay, summer 1518, a summer we will never forget, sadly. One of the most bizarre events in medieval history, the dancing plague. The town of Strasbourg was calm, cool, and or collect until out of nowhere, one woman began to dance uncontrollably in the streets. She was convulsing, it was wild, but then soon others joined in and eventually there were over 400 people dancing their days away. Now it sounds funny in some degree, but it's really tragic. This was not a good time at all. A great amount lost their lives due to pure exhaustion and heart attacks, and the authorities tried their best to help the situation, so they paid for musicians to perform for them while they danced, while they were convulsing. They're like, oh yes, bring in a jazz band, let's complete this image. This happened a few times in Europe, not just once. Between the 14th and the 17th centuries, we still don't know what exactly happened, but there were dance plagues. It was a common occurrence. All we know is that it was some sort of illness. It was not like Step Up. It wasn't a fun thing like Step Up at all. No one's just popping and locking in the streets. They're like, hey, nice, let's bring in some music. This is great. No, people were very sick. They were very ill. Number 5, Shroud of Turin. They say art is subjective, but what does the Shroud of Turin really show us here? Is it JC? Is it Jesus Christ himself? Many believe the cloth shows an image of Jesus when he was crucified, and once you see it, it's hard to argue otherwise, hard to get out of your mind. Radiocarbon tests do date the cloth back to around 1260, and recent studies suggest that shroud was used in medieval church plays that would depict this exact scene, the resurrection of one Jesus Christ. What do you think? Accurate representation or another case of face pareidolia? Face pareidolia is when you see Jesus and things. I look at our producer Chris, I see Jesus every day right there. A little bit more jacked than Jesus, but you know, same image, more or less. Number 4, summer is cancelled. Back in 2013, scientists discovered a volcano on Lombok Island in Indonesia that went off sometime around May into October 1257, and scientists all agree that this eruption was the largest blast that the Earth had seen in 7,000 years. So it was quite a spectacle, a horrible spectacle. If that. Cut to the next year, 1258, the following cold temperatures ruined crops and brought famine to pretty much all of Europe. Cattle were all dying off quickly, it was far too cold for them to even stand a chance, and it's estimated that London saw 15,000 deaths that year alone. Experts believe that this volcanic eruption was a factor in the Little Ice Age that changed global temperatures from the 14th to 19th century. That's like if Yellowstone went off tomorrow. It would be a really bad time, and then afterwards would be almost worse, if anything. No resorts for a while, I think. Definitely not. Number 3, the Great Famine. The medieval adjective game, back again with the Great Famine. Awesome, another great. All of Northern Europe suffered the Great Famine in 1315, so only like 60 years after that volcano went off. I mean, like, what luck is that? What a terrible time to be alive. 1315 to 1317, 2 years of famine, countless lives were lost, and of course, with people losing hope, crime rate shot up to an extreme level. Can't even describe some of the things that were recorded, but my God, people were horribly insane. The Great Famine brought unrest in peasants, but it also disturbed members of nobility. It's always nice when that happens, right? It's not all of us suffering. Some of these noble purple lords up here are also starving. Cool, we're even. They were set back, and in turn, they gave up the oath of chivalry. Now, talk about the Dark Ages. They're like, you know what? No. Number 2, plague bearer. Busboys, but for bodies. Let's do it. My god, this one's really dark. The hot summer of July 1665, right before London saw that great fire. What to do with all of these poor souls who have been hit by the plague? Now, bodies at this point were literally starting to pile up. So we need a new profession, somebody that deals specifically with these horribly infected bodies. Any volunteers? Show of hands. Yep, we got one. Like a plague bearer, for example. There we go, just what we need. A plague bearer has your back and your front and all of your infected places. Church wardens would organize burials. This was a normal thing back in the 1600s, but when the plague hit, they had to change things up. If somebody had the plague, well, these plague bearers, these brave souls, they would step up. They were the ones responsible for transporting all these bodies far, far away. And then they would bury them, right? Just way over there. Great idea. Honestly, the further the better. Couldn't agree more. A church would house these plagued souls away from society. Now, it sounds sad, but this was the best call, all things considered. So no, you weren't visiting any of your deceased loved ones anytime soon. And finally, number 1, medieval punishment cleaner. This one really sucks. Best for last. Here we go. Back in medieval times, many executions were public. The town would come out, watch a hanging or two, and then grab some bread and then head home. They're like, hey, classic Sunday. This was normal back in medieval days. Medieval punishments were like an event, but like modern events, somebody has to stick around and clean the place up. One of the earliest documented executioners goes back to 1202. He was the OG headsman. His name was Nicholas Johann, and their nickname was the Justice. The Justice. Are you kidding me? My palms are already sweating. Are you sure it wasn't the Mountain? My god. Afterwards, this position spread through many capitals and large towns of Western Europe, and with them came the execution cleaners. Yeah, just a squeegee and a spray bottle. They're like, hey, which table, boss? Let's do this. Over his 36 years of ruling, King Henry VIII executed roughly 57,000 people. Yeah, welcome to the Middle Ages. Hope you like mopping. You're gonna be doing it a lot. Like a lot.